Hello, I'm Dr. Evelyn Lewis, President and Chair of the Veterans Health and Wellness Foundation. Welcome to the Veterans Lived Experience podcast, Empowering Warriors, where we bring together change makers, supporters, and advocates of veterans and their families' well-being. Today, we have a very special guest. He has spent most of his career as a champion for mental health, community service, and advocacy. Joining us is Mr. Raul Andrews Jr., Esquire, the Executive Director of the American Psychiatric Association Foundation, and a member of APA Executive Leadership Team. With a career spanning law, leadership, and policy, Raul has held key executive positions at AARP, dedicated years to pro bono legal service, and received multiple national recommendations for his impact on the community. He currently serves as the 135th President of the Bar Association of the District of Columbia and has been recognized with prestigious awards such as the 2022 United States Presidential Lifetime Achievement Award and the NABVETS National Humanitarian Award. Today, we'll explore his incredible journey from law to leadership and mental health advocacy, discussing the intersection of veteran healthcare, mental wellness, and policy initiatives. I had the chance to sit down with Raul in his office where we talked of his incredible journey from law to leadership in mental health advocacy, discussing the intersection of veteran healthcare, mental wellness, and policy initiatives.
So tell me a little bit about yourself. Things like how you grew up, where you grew up, your parents, those kinds of things that sort of have brought you to the point to where you are today.
So I'm from Third Ward, Texas. That's the southeast side of Houston. And I have been in multiple phases of my career, but growing up, went mostly to Catholic schools until I got to college. I graduated from Texas Southern University in Houston. Before moving west, I did to the Wild Wild West of the East Coast in the 80s of Washington, D.C. to go to law school at Howard. My father was a doctor, went to Meharry for medical college, Hampton University before that. My mother was a campus queen at Texas Southern University. As a matter of fact, when I was in school, she was on the Board of Regents.
So people often talk about 6 degrees of separation, but I will often follow that up with there's probably less than that. As you were speaking, there were 3 points of commonality. Went to Catholic schools, father went to Meharry Medical College, and also HBCU. So it sort of never ends in terms of how close we are there. In regard to your education and where you got your training, what led you into wanting to go into the legal field with your father in medicine? What directed you in that other area?
When you're coming out of the civil rights era, I think most parents were obviously moving beyond where their grandparents were legally allowed to go. And so you have my doctor, who I believe wanted all of his children to be doctors. He got 1 out of 4. That's not bad. But I think he wanted us all to do it, but we migrated to areas of our passion and our purpose. And I think it was tougher for me because I was junior. Mm. And so when you're junior and you decide to make a major pivot, the first pivot was, I don't want to live in Texas. And I think a lot of what I saw growing up was a climate that really has become much harder today than even I imagined it 35, 40 years ago. But I saw an opportunity in Washington to be as close to my full self as possible. And many of my mentors were judges or lawyers who my father actually had introduced me to. And I try to gravitate it towards how they did what they did and why they did it. So I never forget that I felt like my dad woke up one day and said, okay, you want to be a lawyer, but I need you to be the right kind of lawyer. So he introduced me to a state lawmaker. And like many young know-it-all children, When came down, ate some breakfast. Hey, did you call the representative? Yeah, I'm gonna call him tomorrow. Second day, hey, eating a big old Jethro Bodine bowl of cereal. Hey, did you call the representative? You know what? The next thing I do as soon as I finish this. Third day, hey, I already made you an appointment. Your interview is at 11 o'clock tomorrow. Be there, wear a suit and tie, and the rest was history.
In that regard, when coming up during that civil rights era, what led you to the American Psychiatric Association as an executive director for this organization?
So fortunately, my parents did help me with school. And even though I got a BA in psychology in the end, I did major in psychology. And so that allowed me to maintain my health because at least for 4 years, he's doing an ology that could lead to medical school. And so I was the only person in my cohort who wasn't trying to go to medical school or get an MPH and ended up going to get a JD. So that was when we were at the DSM-3. And I really didn't understand until I showed up at the American Psychiatric Association in 2021 why I needed to buy the DSM-3 for my abnormal psychology class.
Well, in thinking about those things there, you come from a background, your previous position was at AARP. How did you, what was it that led you from there to an organization like this?
So this is chapter 3 of my career. So I was in the private practice of law for 16 years before I got to AARP. You still working with people who are driving big organizations. And so when I pivoted out of day-to-day in-court private practice, I was looking for a comparably sized but more human organization, because when you're just representing original equipment and manufacturers and franchisors, you kind of become inhuman, right? It's just people with money fighting other people for money and trying to, but they're touching people everywhere you go. And so I think as I moved to AARP, it was really an opportunity. My muse in life was my maternal grandmother, Ms. Mackey. And working at AARP, I was able to quote unquote represent my grandmother every day of my career, even though I was much closer in age to some of the widows that I was helping than my grandmother. But it was a nice testament. And I did that for 15 years.
And as you did that work, how did that sort of translate or lead you into a position like this?
So the caregiver's burden is a big area of work that we focused on at AARP. And when we talk about the caregiver's burden, we principally were talking about those folks, many of whom are working, still have younger children in grade school, and they're caring for an older loved one, sometimes mom, dad, uncle, auntie, so forth and so on. And what was really interesting about the transfer is that some of those caregivers were veterans and military families. And so they had unique challenges of trying to care for an older loved one who, the world, this is even the pre-Vietnam era veterans, so you're talking about folks end of World War II, early Korea, trying to navigate all these new technologies and so forth. The other thing that I think that came out of it was, though, because I had my original DNA in psychology, we focused a lot on dementias. And so true brain health was a big part of AARP's focus. But what started to happen the closer we got to the pandemic, and what started to happen after the murder of George Floyd, I saw something that was different from brain health. All of a sudden, it was mental health, not just brain health. So yeah, you could be depressed, right? On the one hand, but you also could be worried about cognitive reactions and so forth. And so there wasn't an exact identical nature between brain health and mental health. And like I said, people trying to work through what they saw on live TV with George Floyd. Even if you weren't in Minnesota, even if you weren't filming that, you were forever changed. And then think about pre-vaccine COVID, where we didn't know. Now people get COVID today, and I think we're kind of learning to live with it. But it was a death sentence in 2 weeks. And so if people were scared to go outside. Well, can you come? Can you not come? We lost the opportunity to have rituals. When I was at AARP, about 500,000 members would die every year, just naturally. And now all of a sudden, some of those people in assisted living facilities, nursing homes and so forth, and you're saying through a window goodbye to a person. Then when it's over, we can't have a memorial service. We can't have a funeral home going because of disease. So it was just an interesting transition. So when I kept trying to force fit a rectangle into a square around brain health, some angel of mercy came and said, hey, APA is looking for somebody to work with their foundation. Your name came up, and I decided to take the call that day, and the rest, that was like April of 2021. And the rest is history.
That's an interesting way of getting here. As you spoke about both brain health and mental health, a lot of people don't recognize the connection between those two. Even though they're separate terms, they're very interconnected. You also mentioned veterans as a part of that conversation, and I've heard that you have sort of a soft spot, if you will, for that population of people. When we talk about brain health and mental health, that's a subpopulation of people that is very highly impacted by those things, much so than their non-veteran counterparts. In your work here, once you assume the position of executive director at the American Psychiatric Association, and began your work here, talk to me a little bit about what it was like when you arrived, where you are now, and looking at that sort of subpopulation of people. What's been done around that group that it helps sort of mitigate, reduce, if you will, the numbers that are impacted by both brain and mental health issues?
So the platform that the APA Foundation sits is to promote the mental health and well-being of individuals and communities where they live, learn, work, worship, and play. And when I looked at our platform, the place where we live seemed to be the place where we're putting the least amount of time and the least amount of resource. And so live. If you're going to say where we live is the first pillar, how does that look? You know, when it comes to schools, we can show you quantifiably what we're doing around schools. When it comes to faith, we can show you quantifiably. When it was live, it was a little squishy. And so borrowing some of the work that I helped lead at AARP, live really became disaster relief and some recovery and working with military and veterans families. And some of that started because when now Congressman Anthony Brown was Lieutenant Governor of the state of Maryland, his office reached out to me when I was running Maryland AARP back in 2009, 2010, and said, we have too many retired veterans between the district line and the Delaware line. We need to do better by them. And many of them are 50 and old. What can we do about the older aging veteran who needs help? And so we worked on the first stand down in Baltimore City that they had ever had. And then we had our own symposia. But the one learning that I didn't have at AARP that has helped me, I think, the most at APA and the APA Foundation is that we weren't always tapping into veterans to try to be helpful. So sometimes in our efforts to be helpful, we create more problems because we didn't speak the dialect. We didn't really understand the culture, but we knew we wanted to help. And they're like, well, regardless of whether they served, they're 55 years old, they're 65 years old, they're 75. And sometimes when we did some outputs, we were very surprised by the outcome, inconsistent or worse. And then that was where I learned, if you want to work with this very treasured, respected, and very hard position of people who have done hard things in hard places and are hard to reach, then you need to be talking to them about what they need. You need to be talking to them about how they want it delivered and who will be the face and the voice of talking to this community about the things they need. So I think that has changed because now we're targeting partnerships as a way of driving it. And so we're trying to amplify the work that our partner does and not so much that the APA Foundation is doing X, Y, and Z.
That takes me to another place. Another question I wanted to talk with you about is partnerships. You know, the value of them. What does that look like in terms of the work of the APAF and others out there doing that work that you're talking about?
So the nice thing about the partnerships is we're looking for a triple win. You know, people talk about the win-win.
Mhm.
I think about the win-win-win. So how does the partner win? How does the foundation win? And how does the community win if we do something together? So the first layer of discussion, whether there's a win-win-win, does it involve live, learn, work, worship, play?
Okay.
And if it doesn't involve one of those, can we really add value?
Mhm.
Or are we just doing our handshake transaction? Then the second layer, which is really important, what the foundation does really well is thought leadership, our ability to convene at an international level,
Mhm.
and micro philanthropy. So the reality of it is, you know, we're not a major philanthropy. So if we
Mhm.
start from back, you know, we're not in position to write $1 million, $2 million, $20 million grants. But sometimes a quasi-restricted or unrestricted $10,000, $15,000 can mean everything to a smaller nonprofit that's really trying to do the right thing and has the constituency. You know, from our ability to convene, you know, because we work hand in glove with HHS and a number of other federal agencies and some other NGOs, if we invite people into our place or ask people to meet us at another place,
Mhm.
more often than not, they will accept that invitation. Now, here's the beauty of it. Some of those invitations were born of the fact that I represented some of those organizations in chapter 1 of my life. Some of those other organizations have come because they work with me at AARP and they're like, well, we don't know why you left, but we over here, we got another way to work together. But, you know, then that thought leadership. So we have 39,000 psychiatrists, including a uniformed services branch of doctors. The APA Foundation, because it is the affiliated charity of the APA, we have access to all 39,000. So there is no range of work anywhere in the world with members in APA across all 50 states and territories and 100 countries around the world. If we send a call out with appropriate time that we need this particular physician psychiatrist to tap in on this particular issue, we almost never get told no.
So I've heard that you all have a fellowship program. Tell me a little bit about that.
So the good news is we inherited a 50-year history of of APA working with HHS and SAMHSA to help grow the future of the behavioral and mental health workforce. And so the nice thing about it was we were too small when I got, you know, we had less than 150 trainees in a core fellowship program. This is a professional development program for trainees in 75, 80 teaching hospitals across mostly North America, but some international. And I saw and heard about the fight for slots, for GMB slots for psychiatry. And we've done a little better since the pandemic. But for the most part, you know, mental health and psychiatry sort of has been a stepchild in the house of medicine when it comes to slots. And so I said, well, one of the things you got to do is increase the number of people you're touching. So what we've been able to do across 9 different cohorts is started with that first cohort, and we've grown our core fellowship program to over 200 trainees. And they're training in public, they're training in forensic, they're training in child and adolescent, they're training in geriatrics, so forth and so on. Some of them are even, I got 2 fellows who actually are on Capitol Hill, placed in the offices of congresspersons or senators working on health policy. And so, so this has been a huge watershed for us. And then what we wanted to do is go deeper into the pipeline, because I think most people in public health would say, and maybe that's how I got lost. You waited too late to talk to these students about a mental health or a public health career. So how did you go deeper into the pipeline? So one of the things we did a MOU, a memorandum of understanding with PsychSci. This is the psychology clubs of our camp colleges and universities all across the United States. And then there's a group called the Health Occupation Students of America, HOSA.
Okay.
We were introduced to HOSA, which will be celebrating its 50th anniversary in 1976. They don't focus just on doctors. HOSA is working with students who just think they want to be in a health career, regardless of title. And then the biggest thing we did is that we went into our medical schools and we looked at all of the trainees who had applied for our very competitive core fellowship program and said, what do you do for these trainees who are not in the program? So of the 1,800, 1,900 trainees around the country, you only talk to 200. So what about that other 800, 900 folks? So we created an ambassadors program. So medical students now can get a glimpse of what it's like to be a trainee, and trainees who are not in the program can get some exposure to what core fellows do. There's some Vanguard stuff that doesn't happen, but I give you a quick story. I was in Minnesota in March of 2024, and I met a young mother who was in her 3rd year of psych residency. She had just had her baby about 3 months ago, and she was telling us what a godsend the ambassador program was, because the heavy lift of the core fellowship program would not have allowed her to successfully create residency and be a mother and a wife. But by being in the ambassador program, get a light touch. I'm not disqualified when my time is right to later come back and apply to be in the fellowship program, and I'll know more about it. So my application to be a fellow will probably be sharper than it would have been right off the cuff. Yeah.
With throwing that and looking at the future of those who would be out there battling that mental and behavioral health issue, what is the foundation doing now with this paucity of mental health professionals that we have and the growing need for them? I mean, for time after time, we've not really dealt with the growing need. And so now we find ourselves in this space where we really are very poorly prepared to actually deliver that health to the folks that need it. So what is the foundation doing to try to help mitigate that situation until we can grow for the ones who are in the ambassador program and the fellowship program?
Fortunately or unfortunately, it took a global pandemic and the murder of somebody on the streets of Minneapolis for people to finally understand that mental health is a healthcare issue. Just the same way as whatever knees and bones, hips, and so forth and so on. And if you need medical attention, it's no problem saying, I need it. The other thing is we like to say there's no health without mental health. And so one of the things we launched in summer of 2023 was a global campaign for humanity called Mental Health Care Works. Mental Health Care Works is about awareness, literacy, and action. So how do we get people to take the first step? Because one of the things we saw in our research, from the onset of a diagnosis of a mental health condition until the first real treatment, is about 10 to 15 years.
Yes.
And after a pandemic, we don't have another 10 to 15 years to wait. So as of November of 2024, we've now eclipsed over 500 million legitimate, medically vetted audience impressions. So this isn't TikTok clickbait. These are real helpful tools, tips, and resources that can come through. The other thing we incorporated was a little more outreach about the 988 National Crisis Helpline. And so almost all of our messages that go out, both on and offline, have some push to get people to call, text, or chat 988, whether that's 24/7, 365, however you want to do it. It doesn't solve all the problems, but it does give you something that wasn't available 3 years ago. The other thing we've tried to do is to make sure that in schools and in workplaces in particular, and now more recently in our faith communities, we're working again with partnerships. So taking our Notice, Talk, Act framework and putting it closer to where patients and caregivers and those who love them are. So in schools, we're training all school staff, not teachers, in Notice. How do I recognize signs and symptoms if I'm a cafeteria worker and Raw always has a voracious appetite? But for the last couple of days, he's just been sitting in the corner, not eating at all. I'm the custodian. I run into the restroom and I see somebody who can't be consoled. And instead of tiptoeing out and saying, I recognize signs and symptoms of distress. Then you got talk. So what are the ways to be a better active listener so that instead of saying, I'm worried about you, what's wrong with you? I'm opening up and saying, hey, is everything okay? And, is there a way I can be a listening ear to you? Not trying to solve all your problems, but once I open up the toolkit and I say, we noticing signs, we having a good conversation, now we got to figure out how to get you some help. And so the one thing that becomes is, what are the appropriate tools, tips, and resources for this person in this situation? quick story. Coaching travel basketball. One of my players, all of them were 13, 14 years of age, had failed a quiz. They're in the layup line and boys being boys, just teasing each other. Oh my goodness, this boy is suicidal because he failed his quiz. Now, before Notice Talk Acting, before I came to the APA Foundation, if I had been at AARP, I don't know that I would have done anything with that. It's just boys being boys, right? But because I saw the situation and I recognized that that kind of chatter, whether it was bullying or not, needed some attention, now I got to figure out how do I take 12 guys and separate them so that I don't further create a problem for somebody who might be in harm's way. But then I'm not waking up tomorrow because I didn't do anything. And then a tragedy happened, and then everybody said, didn't somebody know something? Didn't somebody hear something? So I was able to pull him aside because his free throw percentage was a little low. And I'm like, well, y'all shoot layups. We're going to go down here and shoot free throws because those free throws are going to cost us a championship. And we talked a little bit, so forth and so on. Then I got the whole team together. I'm like, you know what? I know when I came up, sticks and stones will never, break my bones, but words will never hurt me. Truth be, words hurt. And so we just got to be more compassionate as a team. It's not about telling jokes. That's all fine and well. But then the one thing I would not have done 3 years ago that I did that year is I went and told his parents and I said, look, don't freak him out. But I need you to be aware that this did happen. And so I don't know how you're going to come down on it to try to get his grades to where you think they should be and where we want them to be. But the reality of it is this was a tough day for him. And I've had a conversation with him. I had a conversation with the team. But let's be supportive as we try to get the outcome that we all want.
It's kind of like the follow through.
Kind of like the follow.
Got to do it all the way.
You got to go all the way through.
That brings something else to mind when you spoke about, boys will be boys. And so you wanted to address that issue in a way that it didn't make him distant to what you were trying to do. We also have subpopulations of people who need to be approached a certain way. We spoke a little bit about veterans, but as we all know, also there are other subpopulations of African Americans or Blacks or Hispanics, Latinos, and others who our approach to them about mental and behavioral health issues has to be cultivated, culturally appropriate, and a number of different other things. Is that sort of built into the foundation's approach to their work, to the toolkit, in the fellowship, those kind of places where we are educating folks and getting them to a point where they will be doing more in those areas?
We are culturally humble. I don't know that I would say we're culturally competent, so that doesn't mean we get it right every time. But the reality of it is, like in our campaign, we don't use the term stigma, but we do know in underrepresented audiences, it's out there.
Yeah.
We don't use terms like DEI and so forth and so on. But if you look at our creatives, and particularly what we call our anthem video, that is the 90-second introduction to Mental Health Care Works, that can be found on mentalhealthcareworks.org, you will see the most diverse, the most inclusive campaign visual you've probably ever seen anywhere, but it doesn't say DEI and it doesn't say stigma. With the fellowship program, it is the largest, most diverse pipeline program for physician psychiatrists in the world. And so that cuts across all layers of the prism when it comes to underrepresented audiences. I think the one place, and I can't control the Flexner report, but the one place we struggling the most is Black male doctors. So we've done a great job with women. The majority of our trainees in the program are women. The majority of them are multicultural. But the reality of it is it's harder. And I'm not going to get into all the policy decisions for Black men to get through, but that's one of the reasons why we did HOSA and partnership with PsychSign, because if organic chemistry is the problem, and we all know organic chemistry is the problem, and we're not going to take it off the requirement, then what more do we need to do as we look forward to make sure people who are coming out of high school thinking about a career in medicine, okay, what do we need to be doing with them in summer so that they get acclimated to organic chemistry. Some people go to those classes, believe it or not, still first year, first person in their family ever to go to college in 2024. And then when they go to medical school, nobody in their family's ever been to medical school. I had no idea what they expect. And the schools are not setting up anything to necessarily help them with the matriculation. So what can the training program do for a first generation medical student that a school won't do or can't do or won't do? And then once we get to residency, now you're in a GME program. Now what do we do for somebody like, I had no idea what's the difference between a third year med student and a second year resident. How do I then negotiate contracts and get through these boards and do all these things? So I know we can't do everything. But I have learned over 35 years, together, we can do anything.
And that speaks to your work with partners and other organizations, et cetera, because that what you were just talking about is critical to our success, whether you're talking about men or women. And as we talk about ethnic minority groups, it is critical to us being able to grow those numbers to be able to bid out there and help with the issues that we're talking about. Tell us a little bit about presidential award that you got and some of the work that you've done with Colonel Page, who, as we know, is quite a community activist, and he works in a number of different areas. And so tell us a little bit about that relationship also.
So the Points of Light Foundation is the caretaker of the President's Community and Volunteer Service Award platform. Believe it or not, there are multiple tiers of the award. And even at the high school level, our young student scholars who are engaged in community activities can qualify for awards. But the Lifetime Award requires a combination of over 4,000 hours of community service that has to be documented. And I can tell you, quite frankly, in 2022, when I received the award, if they had asked me to apply for it, regardless of any work I had done, they'd still be waiting on the application. So it wasn't something I sought, and that's probably true for most of the blessings of awards I've received. But I think the award speaks more to the work that we need to do. And if it shined a brighter light on some of the work we were able to do so that we could get help, then that is a blessing and a benefit. So although a lot of my service started in high school and college, the one real bright light was in 2026, before they were talking about the mortgage meltdown. I was named the DC Bar's Pro Bono Lawyer of the Year. And some of that work came from representing people in Ward 5, 7, and 8 who were victims of the mortgage foreclosure game. And, they didn't know they had signed these predatory loans, and people were trying to take all of their property. And a lot of times, that's the only thing they had was the house. And there were multiple generations of folks living in it. So we were able to save over 40 homes over a 1.5 year period of time for people who probably would be homeless today or worse if we weren't able to do that. And so that was part of the hours. That wasn't all the hours. Obviously, I had some fraternity hours with Kappa Alpha Psi and a number of other organizations. I'm a Rotary member, so Rotarians, a way to give back as well. But one of the things we did, remember I talked about our ability earlier to be a convener.
Yes.
And so we host the largest archive of psychiatric assets in the world right here at our headquarters at American Psychiatric Association. And so we did a veterans event. And so one of the people who just happened to RSVP was Colonel James Page, retired U.S. Army. And I knew there was something about him when I saw him that seemed familiar, but I didn't know what it was. And so when the event was over, we went and took some other pictures. We were all kind of moved and inspired and sobered by what had happened during the production. And we started talking, and it turns out he was in a rival fraternity, but we were both formed the same year. So we had a 1911 United paragraph. And so he started telling me a little bit about the work that he was doing with the Concerned Citizens Network of Alexandria. And one of the things I was lamenting at that time is that we were doing a lot of great work all across the country, but really not a lot of work at all in DC, Maryland, or Virginia. We were going everywhere, but at home. And I said, we got to play some more home games. And I was trying to work with the district, and they weren't unwilling to work with us, but they had a lot more structure to try to navigate to get to the people who could make the decisions. So Colonel Page says, well, if you come out to Alexandria City, the mayor and everybody else is going to be there. And I'm like, no, this can't be true. He's like, well, we're going to be meeting at St. Joseph's Church. All I had ever heard about was Alfred Street. He said, no, we're going to be at St. Joseph's Catholic Church. I said, the mayor, the superintendent, all these people going to show up at Little St. Joe's Catholic Church. I said, that's unbelievable. I said, okay, I'm going to come across the bridge. He's like, no. We'll come to you. And I said, well, no, because there's always a real beltway kind of mentality of like, who's more important? Yeah. Are you going to come across the bridge or we going to come? So he brings the sheriff, the fire chief, the director of human services, all of them coming and sitting in my conference room, talking to us about the great work that they do. And they're already in partnership. They're ready to take their work not only to the next level across the region, but they think they have started to solve some of our systemic problems that they don't have the megaphone to tell the world. It's like, well, maybe you guys have the mouthpiece we need to shine a brighter light on the world. So, I think what the great thing about Colonel Page is he's a real human being, but he brings, and this is not something I thought I would get out of working with veterans, he brings a humanistic military discipline and focus to the kind of work we do. So the one thing I really didn't know a lot about until I met Page, but I was kind of haphazardly doing some of it, was all this notion of, how veterans, they've got to, adjust, adapt, and overcome, right? And so I really was doing that, but I was doing the steps all out of order. And I'm starting with overcome and like, you haven't adjusted yet. Like, you got to roll it back. And so I think he's helped not only our organization, but as a mentor and a friend, Colonel Page has helped my own growth because I'm seeing the world differently than I saw the world before we were able to meet. And it did remind me, while I might have had the aptitude at 40 to do the job I'm doing today, I didn't have the attitude at almost 60 to do the job. So 20 years of growth in 3 years, just because I've been working with Colonel Page and people he's introduced me to.
Well, I've asked you a ton of different questions, and I just wanted to say thank you for your time and for engaging in this dialogue to help us better understand what it is you're doing with this organization and all of what it's involved in its reach. And even though we've talked about a lot of things, I've asked a lot of questions, is there anything else that I might have missed that you really think those who are listening to our conversation really should know about you or the organization or the two of you together?
I think we are here to try to help make tomorrow a little bit better than yesterday. And now that we've all discovered or rediscovered that we have mental health, let's not get stuck on, I have it. Let's make sure we're feeding it. Let's make sure we're nurturing it. And so it may very well be that your work life, your home life, your school life has nothing to do with medicine or the field of psychiatry. But the reality of it is we have a shortage. And anything you can do to help get us better, to better help those who are trying to take this journey to be physician psychiatrists, we welcome that help. We welcome those leads. We welcome that feedback. So you can go to apaf.org and you can find out more information about us, including more information about me, because I know my bio is up there. But more important than anything else, 988 and that mentalhealthcareworks.org website. 988 on the one hand, again, 24/7, 365, call, text, or chat. mentalhealthcareworks.org. Even if you don't think you need or want 988, nobody's going to know that you went to mentalhealthcareworks.org and you poked around. You're going to see tools, tips, resources, and the personal stories of about a handful of people who have come forward to say, this was my mental health journey. And if that helps one more person take the first step to getting the help they deserve, then I think that was a good day for us.
Absolutely. It was a good day for all of us. thank you again for your time and for the information you share with us, and very much look forward to continuing this conversation.
Thank you so much.
Welcome.
Raul, thank you for an insightful and powerful conversation about your journey of commitment, service, and advocacy. Your leadership at the APA Foundation is truly meeting the needs, the mental health needs of our communities and veterans. As a Veterans Health and Wellness Foundation, we are committed to ensuring that veterans and their families receive the care, resources, and support they need. Conversations like today's reinforce the importance of partnerships, collaboration, advocacy, and proactive solutions in closing the gaps in healthcare and mental wellness. Many thanks to our listeners for joining us. Be sure to tune in next time as we continue to bring you more impactful discussions on veterans' health, policy, and empowerment. Until then, be strong, be empowered, and as always, thank you for your service.